My name is Susan Cornelius. I am the lead mentor for the Innovation Center's I-Core program out of the National Science Foundation. I've worked with teams. At this point, they tell me I've worked directly with 40 technologies that are the teams and another 20 that we're working with other mentors, and we've launched a lot of stuff out of there. And by stuff, I mean technologies. And it's been a lot of fun. I'll tell you guys more about myself in a minute. I want to start with some principles about the art of innovation. First of all, I have had the opportunity to work with one of the founders of Apple. His name's Guy Kawasaki. Guy was the chief innovation officer of Apple. He was also what they called their technology evangelist. He was the one that went out and figured out all the ways in which he and Steve Jobs would get on camera and talk with the world about what they were doing. Because the question became, why adopt Apple when you've got other companies out there like Xerox and such that were creating computers at the time? Why deal with Apple? And so he became what we call a technology evangelist. I had the opportunity to be mentored by him. But I've been doing this for about 21 years. And it's actually 31 years. And was using words and doing things that were working along with my other colleagues in San Diego, California at the time, which is a hub for tech and biotech and medtech startups, biopharma. And we were using certain ways of doing things that was being highly successful. We were launching a lot of companies. And we did a lot of things that Guy has codified and put into language that's actually very useful. So what we're going to talk about first is, we don't want to be vague, but we want to talk about some basic principles of startups. And then we're going to talk about what a startup is and the steps of working on it. First of all, startup companies that succeed make meaning. Everybody's thinking, oh, I'm going to get rich, I'm going to make money, this is what I'm going to do. And what we've discovered is if you first start with the meaning and be really clear on the meaning of what it is you do, that is the thing that attracts the money, because it attracts people who either love what you're doing or people who go, that's not a kind of work. And we'll talk about that in a second. The second thing, and this is going to sound rather goofy, but with startups, we like to have a mantra. We're building a team of people. They're a startup team. A lot of times it's a group of students around a table, or it's students and their professors, or in the world in which I live, most of the time, it's a group of people who've already graduated from college and or have never gone to college. And they've got an idea for either a retail business or a high-tech startup, deep technologies, software, computer devices, and or brand new pharmaceuticals and treatment processes and medical devices to help with that. And it becomes really, really clear that they're really focused on the technology, but they want to start up what they call a company. And they get so focused on putting in place all the things to call themselves a company and develop their technology, they don't pay attention to, okay, so now that you built it, who's going to use it? And that's our core problem to solve with startups. What is the market? What is the meaning of this? What difference will it make? And how are we going to reach the people who could need it and use it? And are we correct and right about the people who need it and can use it? Who makes the decisions to buy? And who is actually going to employ whatever this wonderful idea is that we've got? So we say to ourselves, make a mantra. Now, you guys have probably heard that Nike had a mantra when it first started off that was just do it. They still use it, but now their mantra is authentic athletic performance, that somehow or another by using their products, that's what you achieve. FedEx uses the mantra peace of mind. And I had a company, one of the companies that I worked with was called Scientific Solutions. It was my own. And our mantra was accelerate particles. And we'll talk more about that later. We also want to make sure that startups have the capacity to jump to the next curve. Frequently, a startup starts based on a product or an idea, or they've actually got a prototype that they think is the thing that the market's going to want. We are always working with them to work on something we call scalability. Scalability from the standpoint of how can they get to market. How many units can they sell, first prototype, then sell, and to what degree is that product going to change? Because technology is changing so quickly these days. We start off with one product, and by the time we're at the end of 19 months, maybe get our first investments and grants, we're already got an old product coming to market, and other people are thinking the same thing, or they've changed the idea we've got. They don't know about our idea necessarily, but they've changed it and they've done one better. So we have to create capacity in small teams for constantly doing product development. So a startup company is not a company. It's another way of being organized. We'll talk about that in a minute, but we need to always plan for being able to jump to the next curve. So what we're doing is we are doing planning, but it's not that necessarily that kind of planning that we've learned or heard about from our associates that go to business school. We're not writing complicated business plans. We're using something called a business model canvas. We'll talk about that in a minute too. We want people to be able to roll the dice. What does dice mean? It means deep, intelligent. I got to read this because I don't always remember it. Deep, intelligent, complete, empowering, and elegant products. Oh, those are fine words, but essentially it means we build something that people want. And the only way to figure that out is by talking to the customers from the moment we get the idea. And that's a hard thing for people to accept. I got to develop my product. I can't talk about to people unless my product's done and I know what it does. We don't want to build that product and waste money unless we know people actually need something like that. So we have to teach people how to be storytellers and develop a technology picture. Eventually, we want them to have a prototype, and quickly, 9 months. But when we start off with our idea, we are describing our elegant, empowering, complete product. We don't necessarily have it. We also work with people to say to them, don't worry, be crappy. We're not saying happy. Failure happens. Things don't work. And we refer to those things as pivots. What the problem is if we try to get a perfect product out there, it's going to take us too doggone much time. We're not going to have the funding, and we can't test it anyway to see if it's useful. So we're not trying to create the perfect product in a startup. The only exception to this is biopharmaceuticals. That we can't put inside the human body until it is perfect. But if we take a look at med tech, deep technologies and high tech communications technologies, computer technologies, there can be a version 1. It doesn't have to be perfect. We also talk about letting 1,000 or 100 flowers bloom. We want to have a target audience, and we want to talk with people. And again, this is the business of customer interviews, of people working with one another to learn and understand what we're doing, even when we don't have a product, because if we have a connection with them and they start talking about us. I've been talking to this small company that's starting up, and we would like them to use the word startup, but this small company that's just starting up, and they've got this idea and it's really incredible. That's how we find investors. So, and that's how we find early adopters. That's how we find places to prototype. So it's really important that we go out there and let those people become our evangelists, keep in touch with them, market with them in a very different way using a ton of social media. Okay, so this is another play on words, churn, baby, churn. We want to get customer feedback the whole way through on what we're working on. So though we do initial interviews with people to find out what they think about market size, customer segments, the value of what we're doing and how we're going to sell, those are the things we're asking questions about. We don't get deep into our technology in those conversations. We want to actively obtain customer feedback as we go into our next versions of what it is we're doing. So we do those initial customer interview sessions. We ask them to stay in touch with us. We stay in touch with them. We even hold hackathons or we talk with them online in meetings and group meetings on LinkedIn, so that when we come up with the next version, we show it to them and they can tell everybody, look at this thing these guys will come up with. We also work under the concept of niche thyself, N-I-C-H-E. We have to prove the value of what we're doing and why it's unique to market. Startups can compete based on price and uniqueness. And their team. And those are the 3 things that they can use to compete out there in the market, because nobody knows who they are. They don't know what they're doing. And all of a sudden they show up and they start talking to people. And then perfecting your pitch. One of the reasons why the UNM Innovation Center Rainforest works so hard on pitch contests is we have an obligation to work with people to put them in a position where they can talk to others about what it is that they're doing. What we're really trying to do with how do you start a startup by talking this way is we're trying to provide stability for a startup that's got a ways to go. Most startups within their first 9 months have got a lot of information about whether the market wants to accept their product. They probably have got their first prototype, the exception being pharmaceuticals. And within 18 months, we're looking at, we've already secured grants if we're going that way, and funding from our initial investors. They're called pre-A investors. And at the end of 3 years, we may actually have something that's saleable in market. That is the most likely scenario, though, is 19 months for computer software applications and things like that. For hard devices, audit and assessment devices, devices that can be used in the assessment of for patients and things like that, it's much longer. It can be 3 to 7 years. And so we have to figure out how we keep them alive and we keep them funded. And a lot of times that's with grants, support by national laboratories, support by corporations, but we're looking at keeping the message out there so that the rail line, we're running the train down at 200 miles an hour. And that's a high-speed train. We are at 19 months wanting to have a prototype that we can place out in the market. And we either have a partnership with somebody to produce it or we're licensing it. So those are the principles behind what we're doing. Can we go to our first slide, Cecilia? Yep, okay, I wanted to mention my background a little bit. I didn't intend on starting off as a high-tech entrepreneur, but it got interesting. I went to 3 different universities, you can see them right there, and just kept on progressively going through degrees and realizing that I was interested in innovation, all kinds of innovation. I like to laugh and tell people that when I was at UCLA, I was sitting in the low bay of the Triga reactor, which is a water-cooled reactor, where we were doing research at UCLA, and watching people come up with compact sodium-cooled reactors that are now being used up in Canada on the Dew Line to provide the electricity for pumping oil from the Hudson Bay all the way down to the United States, and it's going to be used to get it all the way down to New Orleans. So it was kind of fun. I was in the middle of innovation, didn't even know it. I don't think we even used the word. I've worked in about, what have I got up there? 3, 6, 7 different industries as an executive, and they all taught me a lot about what I needed to know. But the bottom line is that 30 years ago, I decided that I was an ecosystem leader and a startup mentor. And I used my relationships in the early days with those corporations to come up with ideas. I still use them to network people, but I'm exclusively a startup entrepreneur. And that changes the rules of being an entrepreneur. Yes, we can take classes in leadership training. Yes, we can take classes in entrepreneurship, but they're basically based on corporations. We aren't forming a corporation, we're forming a startup. So let's move on. Next slide, please. So I've been leading into this slide and people always look at me with raised eyebrows. Like, what do you mean? I am starting a company. No, you're not starting a company when you start up a startup. You don't have a product, you've got an idea, you may have a prototype, you think your family supports it, your friends tell you it's great. But we got to figure out whether it solves the problem of a larger market. And that is the basic challenge of a startup. That is to organize ourselves in such a way and have a plan for finding that out. We do speak a very strange language. The UNM Rainforest Innovations has a glossary you can get from them that I created. I've been creating over the years. We talk about pitches. Well, that's a 90-second, 15-minute at the max presentation to try to get people's interested in what you're doing. We use the word startup, but we don't call it a company. We say we pivot because we've changed the product and the business model. We talk about customer discovery, which is, everybody goes, how can I talk with a customer when I don't have a product? I don't know anything about sales, which is not what we're doing when we're doing customer discovery. We talk about BMCs. It's a format, a 9-cell chart that I'm going to show you in a wee bit that we fill out on a weekly basis as we get data to look at the trends of what we're finding out about our value to the market. What do they think it is? Our customer segments, are we correct about who we're going to first? How we're going to sell, which is customer relationships, and what channels are going to help us work to get out there and work with us to get things done. In the early days of Scientific Solutions, my company, that's mantra was Accelerate Particles. Our initial channel to our initial first customers was the Office of Science at the Department of Energy. Now, how that happened was interesting. But all of this means that we succeed. It's putting in place a structure, a format, a foundation for getting product to market. If we're going to innovate product, we've also got to innovate business model. So let's go on to the next slide. If you guys have any questions or comments, please, say something to me. I had the honor of being in the first Nike store in Chicago. I was in graduate school at the University of Illinois, and oh my God, I fell in love with that place, and I fell in love with their mantra. Many years later, it's a part of our language as Americans, and the basic way to create a startup and learn how to create a startup is to start a startup. That's it. You start a startup. Everybody's flying by the seat of their pants, and it's typically a team effort, as you see in these photographs. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, this is one of the most important slides I've got in here about how do you start a startup. And this is what we have to have a plan for, and we're going to use our business model canvas to do it. We go down to the bottom where the writing is in red. Typically, a startup starts with an idea you feel passionate about. We're working with students right now in I-Corps who are looking at how do we take all kinds of cells from the human body and create organs using a 3D printing process. We've got students who have an idea for advanced lasers where we custom makes the semiconductors, and we grow the crystals for the lenses, and we use these to improve communications where they're already talking with Facebook. We've got great things coming out of the University of New Mexico. And it starts with these great passionate ideas, and the university supports that. But now I've got to take my brain and recognize there's two hemispheres on it. I got to use my left brain for the technology, my right brain for how I'm going to get it out there and find out if anybody wants it anyway. And who's competing with me? That's one of the most important parts. So one of the first things we do, the next thing up there on the bubbles, but do we do these in a straight order? No, we're actually doing all 6 of them at the same time, is we create a value proposition for our product. Typically, it's a single statement about what we think our product is, how it's going to make a difference. We call that the value prop, or the VP. I like to call it the minimal viable valuable product, MVVP, but the language out there is value proposition. Eventually, we have a value proposition. If we have product and we have service and we have people, we have a value prop for all 3. We don't stick with just one, because how we sell to market with all 3 of those are a wee bit different. We create a team of founders and principals, the cell right above that, 4 to 5. We don't appoint leads. Well, yes, we do, but we don't give them titles of CEO. As a former investor, angel investor, myself and most of my colleagues have an allergy when we find a 5-person team and somebody's the CEO, somebody's a COO, somebody's a CFO, somebody's a CIO, and somebody's a CTO. That we get nervous because founders have a hard time, and sometimes they have to when the investors get involved, letting go of what it is they're doing if they've got those titles, and they make an initial promise of dividing up too many shares in whatever the results are going to be. So, and then we can't give them funding. So we really, really, really like to tell people, give yourself titles as founders and principals, not a CEO. Eventually, the university may bring in a CEO to work and get this thing to market. But in the beginning, while we're exploring whether or not there actually is a company in here, a pony in here, we're not going to deal with titles. Over to the left, now all of this, by the way, in the beginning, the first time we start talking about this, they're hypotheses, and everybody gets that. Hypotheses is, this is what I think I'm doing, this is what I think the result is going to be, but we've got to validate it. And that is what we're doing. Our path to success is validating what we're doing and whether or not it can get to market and whether or not we can actually sell it when it works. Okay? So from the beginning, people like to talk to friends and family who say, oh my God, Susan's so smart. You wouldn't believe what she's doing. That's good. We also talk with our advisors, our mentors at the university, and we ask people, what do you think about what we're doing? But we have to expand beyond that. And what's really interesting is the first time we tell anybody that's what they need to do, they look at us like, I don't know those people. People say yes. One of the students that I'm working with currently is the student that's working on the laser that's used in telecommunications. I said, let's call it Facebook. He said, what? And we did. And he spoke to the manager of all the Facebook sites here in New Mexico. So people want to talk to these people that are trying to start startups. because they don't know what they're developing and they want to learn about their ideas. We don't give them the details or the pre-patent or pre-provisional patent. We just give them an idea of what we're doing, and they want to stay in the loop, being given information. We've even had people say, if you've got one on the shelf that I can use right now, I'd like it right now. And we've had to deliver some things that way in the past. We also work with people on a pitch deck. Now, remember, one of the principles I gave was you need to know how to pitch. And working on your pitch deck it's 10 to 12 slides. It talks about all the things we're going to talk about today. And you have to do it in less than 10 minutes and leave 5 minutes for questions. Investors, whether they're VCs or they're angels, it's kind of like they've got this unwritten rule. 15 minutes, that's what I'm going to give you. If I like it, I'm going to ask you to come back in and talk with my team. So we do create lots of different pitches. I've created thousands in my career, and I know I can kind of get them off the tip of my tongue, but it's a thing about what we talk about is the product, the value. What is the value of the value? Who wants it anyway? And where we are with developing it. What is our scientific process, our business process? When do we think we're actually launching to market? And we mention any help we may need. And we do that in 90 seconds, and we also do it in 10 minutes. We also ask, up on the right-hand side, people to develop a story about their technology. And we also ask them to be able to really detail out that story of their technology, but not how it works, where it places itself in the process. So if I've got a metrology device that's looking at thin films and nanostructures at a nanostructure level and assessing them to see if they're in place and they work, that's what I tell people. And then I try to find out, are you using anything to assess your thin films as you're producing TV sets and computer screens and cell phones? And what are you using? Can you look at a nanostructure level? That's how we talk about it, okay? We hypothesize and research our market during these customer interviews. We ask them, what do you think the market is for something like this? And they tell us. One of them, our most successful students, Dr. Juan Faria Briseño, who was a graduate student when I was working with him, worked with Steve Bruick, and they've now got a product that even the largest metrology device companies in the United States are interested in. You raise funds by talking to family and friends in these initial stages. You're going to have a lot of loan sheets that you've got paperwork on. Dr. Gail Naughton, a colleague of mine who was the first person to develop artificial tissue for repairing human skin, had $2 million on her MasterCard. How she worked that out is a whole story that Gail loves to tell, but she had $2 million on our MasterCard. She had good credit and they were interested in what she was doing is how she worked it out. So next slide. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, but basically I want to explain what entrepreneurs do. I've always found a challenge to explain to people what a startup entrepreneur is. Next slide. Did we tell people what to do? Did we get to play with nice stuff? Did we travel to fun places? No, we're working 24/7. Do we have fun doing what you're doing? I had a girlfriend ask me the other day, Susan, you've been doing this for 30 years. Aren't you retired? Why aren't you having fun? I said, I am having fun. Yeah, we are having fun. We raise funding. We get to help people create cool stuff. We help people use it. We hire people to help, and we build ideas into reality. And we frequently sell or create an equity event. I've dealt with $500 million in letters of intent. Next slide. So why do we do it? To make a difference. That's the bottom line. When I think about some of the entrepreneurs that are out there, like Guy Kawasaki, who we're going to talk about, one of the founders of Apple, or Elon Musk, or any of the names like Mark Zuckerberg or Warren Buffett, we're not trying to become them. But if you take a look into their stories, they really, really wanted to make a difference. You see the old videos of Steve Jobs, and what he's talking about is how what he's doing makes a difference in how we do work. And he was right. He wasn't talking about getting rich. If they had arguments about anything, it was about how did they get this thing out to market? How do they reach people? But it wasn't about the money. In the beginning, they gave things away. The people on this list want to make a difference. And right now, they're criticized very highly for being billionaires, but they're also giving away tons of their money. So let's go on to the next slide. And frankly, we do need money to pay people, but we'll talk about that. How they made money, I've already said. They made a difference in what it was that they were doing. Let's go to the next slide. So what's going on worldwide right now? This is a really interesting statistics. We're, when we think about the UNM program as an accelerator, we're actually bringing together people to help startups find that stability. That's what we're doing, because it's hard working out of your garage. I've done it. I brought in the head of the Department of Science from the DOE into my garage to see the particle accelerators we were working on that improved signal. They were so tiny. When the very first particle accelerator I ever worked on myself when I went to Los Alamos was a half-mile long. And Jefferson Lab had already told us we can't make this work. And we did make it work. So when you take a look at the startups here, those numbers are pretty interesting. It gets really small down at the bottom, 4,228 global exits, meaning they sold the technology to somebody else. And they started off with 472 million people who said they were entrepreneurs. But we are trying to increase the success rate by helping you figure out how to plan. Let's go to the next slide. We've said this before, we'll say it again. Innovation is about offering value, making a change, got to make a difference. So the question becomes, in the work that you're doing, what difference do you want to make as a human being in technology or retail services or banking? And a lot of new software banking apps are still coming up doing things that are amazing, that help you get your loans. So when you walk into a house to take a look at it, pre-approved. And Americans do like buying homes or apartments or condos. So on note paper, when you're sitting here listening to me, what is your plan for success? What difference do you want to make? Think about that for a minute. Does anybody want to come up with an answer about what you're doing there at the Innovation Center, or if you're thinking about your own company, what's the difference you want to make? How about you, Matthew? You got an interesting job. What difference do you want to make?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I mean, I really see myself as, pushing out the technology or the underlying scientific discoveries out into the marketplace. You know, I'm just like one piece of a kind of a process of that, but generally, we take things that are that could just like sit in a university shelf somewhere and then try to create business out of them so people can actually use them and it improves their lives. So that's the kind of difference that I believe I make kind of every day as I help people through the intellectual property, prosecution process.
So if I were to take that and kind of create a mantra out of it, and maybe use a couple of words, what words would I use? I mean, you're talking to professors, advisors, graduate students, a leadership at the university. If I were to create a mantra out of that, what words would you use to say what you're doing?
I would probably say something like, it would be probably a better word than commercializing, scientific discovery, but something more like, kind of propagating or evangelizing, technological and scientific development.
Okay, now I love the
Yeah.
use of the word evangelizing, because I consider myself to be a technology evangelist.
Yeah.
Okay, so a technology evangelist is somebody who is passionate, lives, eats, and sleeps what it is that they're doing to make a difference. So technology evangelist, I like that. Thank you. Let's go to the next slide. So one of the things that I encourage you to do when you're working with entrepreneurs, or when you yourself are figuring out your idea for your next company, is create a dedicated idea slate. A slate comes from the time when they would cut slates out, and their kids were going to school, they didn't have books, and they used chalk that they dug out of the ground and they wrote on it. I used a variety of different computers, one of which is not working right now, to write down the ideas when I get them. And I go back and I take a look at them. So when you have an idea about how you can do what you're doing differently, or something that you can build off the basic idea of what your product is and how you describe that, one of the ideas is to write down ideas. If we don't write our ideas, we're thinking to ourselves, what was that idea I had the other day? And it affects absolutely everything we do. We want you to write them down, because this is what we discover. We think we're helping, let's use Matthew's example, helping technologists at the University of New Mexico launch those technologies. But have you asked those people, what is it they think you're doing best? And maybe that's your real product. And that's what we do when we do customer interviews. And it could be the seed of an idea of a product down the line that we can write about and teach other people how to do, or actually offer up for sale. So let's go on to the next slide. These are some ideas that excite me. I'm not going to get into all of them, but I would love to see something that's called a first responder device. And this comes out of Accelerator technologies, because what we do with accelerators is we create signal. I'd like to have a compact device that, just like in Ghostbusters, fits on the back, and I've got a long camera device that I can shoot out a beam with, which you cannot see, and I can turn off any vest bombs, dirty bombs, or bombs that are in buildings. This is a challenge, and it's something that our security forces worry about no matter where we are. It would also turn off all the cell phones around, but I'd rather turn off the cell phones than have that bomb explode. So that's something. And then I've worked with small children on doing AI software, and it's really funny what their ideas are, but it helps them think about why it is they have to learn math and science. I would love to see a student app for the young children to learn how to teach something, how to do something, like a little tiny robot dog that they have. How do I teach it to do other things? How do I teach it using the algorithms that are in there to recognize my face when I'm happy and sad? I'd love to see something like this being done. Actually, some companies are actually working on it. Sony is, with their robotic dog. Let's move on to the next slide. I would love to see a device that is an at-home gene expression kit, where if my child is sick and I'm trying to understand, is there a genetic component to that? Not that they inherited it, but that a gene has changed. How can I get information to help me understand and help me research online? This came out of the fact that I did lose a baby granddaughter to cancer, and gene expression kits were just coming out when Emily was still alive. This was 18 years ago. And they came out after she died, and it would have been nice to have known, so we could plan for the happiness in her life instead of planning for the happiness inside hospitals, that in fact she had something that she wasn't going to be able to defeat. That didn't mean we helped her die, we helped her live. But this gene expression kit would help me as a parent understand what's going on. All right, let's go to the next slide. And the last thing I would love to do, and I still may do this before I stop doing what I'm doing, is to get together a security company that has hackers working for it, and we go into large companies and corporations. We figure out how to hack their software with their permission, and then we show them how to fix it. This is the holy grail for computer and software engineers right now. There's a lot of young hackers that are working on how to hack. I want to use those skills to do something positive for us, okay? I like that, and I like the idea of this group being an independent group of people from the corporations themselves. Okay, let's go to the next slide. We're going to talk about Guy Takeo Kawasaki and some of the things that he has advised that we've been using for years and working with startups. He's codified it, and what's helpful is to have the language. I'm going to recommend to all of you that you read the book, The Art of the Start 2.0. The Art of the Start 2.0 by Guy Kawasaki. I have all my mentees read it, and it really gets at his use of language is so straightforward and so in your face, and it helps you understand what a startup has to go through. He was one of the original founders of Apple. He and Steve Jobs did not get along with one another, and after 5 years they separated. But he came back 7 years later, and when Apple first got its compact computers out there, they weren't yet these flip-top things, but they were pretty close to the real deal of a compact computer. He was their technology evangelist and got that out. Right now, he is the technology evangelist of a little company called Google Chrome. I laugh when I say that. And he's also the technology evangelist of a company that you're starting to see on TV called Canva. which puts in the tools of the hands of all of us, whether we're using Apple technologies or Microsoft technologies, all the tools we need to do amazing presentations. He's really into communications. He's quite a character. He was born in Hawaii, and I would say probably one of the best mentors in the world. Let's go on to the next slide. So we're going to get into a different part of the details of how you do what you do. Again, these are presentations I presented about 3 weeks ago to Osaka Prefecture University in Japan. And my contact information is on there, or Cecilia can get you there. I've already told you we're not starting up a startup. We use a strange language. So let's go on to talking about what our great idea is. We don't start with these things that are typically taught, okay? We're going to do it eventually because we have to for investors, but it's the basic thing when technologies come to you and you have to evaluate them, and or you're coming up with your technology, we need to start with customer discovery, okay? We have to find out whether anybody's even interested in our idea, what markets are those, and how do we get that out there? So when we work with people, they're going to come to you prepared to do it. When we work with you, you're going to be prepared to talk to investors. Let's go to the next slide. There are basically 6 different kinds of startups. I'll briefly go through them. Lifestyle, this is the kind of startup where you have a Tony Hawk who has a consulting firm and creates products for skateboarders. And he earns money and then he takes off long periods of time and goes on all kinds of speaking tours, TED Talks, and actually travels using his longboard. Had the opportunity to meet him in 2002 when I was starting up a new business within Morgan Stanley and selling products. And he walked in with his longboard, his backpack, and his Hawaiian shirt and shorts and said, I have $200,000 in this bag. I'd like to invest it. He works very, very, very hard, and then he takes off, and his company is still going. So that's a lifestyle startup. And so you have to put in place the things that will keep that startup going. There are small business startups. This is truly the kind of startup where we are turning it into a business. So this could be a food truck. This could be a retail site of some sort. This could be a corner drugstore. That's a small business startup. Scalable startups. This is the whole concept behind Starbucks. We start up the bean roasting part of the business. We start up a couple of stores in Washington, in Seattle, and then all of a sudden we migrated all over the United States. That's a scalable startup. We've got a product that we can increase the number of people who are wanting it. Apple's also a scalable startup. People don't even know why they buy apples all the time. They just know that they work. Viable startups. This is a startup that we can package up and in 3 years' time have an equity event and get it out there. It's got everything that it needs. It's not perfect, but a larger corporation with the power and the money and the resources is interested in taking it even further, okay? We can build and acquire. We can build a startup that acquires other companies. And I've got quite a few friends that are doing this as VCs and angels. And then people who are doing that in terms of real estate. They started up a real estate company. Now they're buying commercial properties and they're keeping on acquiring those things and selling them. And now that's their business model. And then there's social entrepreneurship. This is this rare group of people who put money into something that's going to make a difference in the world, like Doctors Without Borders. So there really is different kinds of startups, and they all have a wee bit of a different path. I would put the computer software startups under scalable startups, viable startups, build and acquire, because those are the areas in which we can build a software package and then move on. Why do we want to even think about this? We need to figure out what kind of trajectory we're on. Is it 3 years? Is it 9 years? Is it 15 years? And the ones that are 15 years, we've got to get a product out there or something that's saleable, whether it's our expertise or our people, so we can fund the pharmaceutical that we're working on. Next slide. When we build the business model canvas, which we're going to talk about in 2 seconds here, we are working with hypotheses and guesses. Now we're going to validate them. So we need specifics of what our customers need, and we have to memorize this. 90% of the companies who fail because they did not have any customers. Why? Because there was a lack of understanding of the technology. Let's move on. So you're very likely not going to be right in the beginning about your target. You figure out what's going on until you do interviews with customers who come back and say, I'm interested in this technology. if it works, this is what it could do for me. And all of a sudden you realize they're talking about a different market. That's why you do these customer interviews. Next slide. This is the business model canvas. It's not the holy grail. It's not our end all. Its purpose is to provide stability for a new startup. Okay, you've got the technology. It sounds great, but we've got some stuff we've got to figure out. Don't read this thing from left to right.
We're watering these plants for Percy. These ones.
Oh, we're watering plants. How did that happen?
That's all the tulips. Okay, you can water those ones.
Okay. That's interesting that I'm hearing that on my side. Is everybody still there? Cecilia, are you there?
Yeah, I don't know who that was coming from.
That's interesting. Okay, so the first place we start with whatever it is that we're doing is with our value proposition and writing that. We move on to our customer segments. We move on to our customer relationships. We work onto our channels. We actually have some big copies of these at the UNM Rainforest Innovations. Big examples. And we use stickies and we put on them, or we use them electronically by using Google Chrome, where we can download this particular file and use electronic stickies, which is what I prefer to do. If you want to learn in detail some of the things I'm going to talk about, go to strategizer.com. Next slide. So we use it. There's 9 boxes. We come up with our first hypotheses before we even talk to anybody. And then we go out of the building and we test it. And going out of the building is Zoom. It's meeting face to face. It's talking to people. And it's having your questions planned in advance. Next slide. This is a really interesting story. Microsoft AI in the last year has blossomed with this huge AI database that they're creating. And the difference between it and other AI is, in the beginning, AI, we had to ask all the questions and design AI so that when we got feedback from whatever device we were learning, it learned from that. It could separate from all of that, separate all that data, and then come back and do something else. What we're able to do right now is create clumps or clusters of AI, and the main program figures out this data you're giving me, which one do I need to go to, and then it learns. So it learns in boxes, and they are creating, based on this, intelligent robots that can they're not sentient, but they can read people's faces, decide what the emotions are, recognize text that's given to them. They can translate and do a whole lot of things. I keep on thinking of C-3PO in the Star Wars movies, who was a translation robot, a translation bot. But we're actually creating them right now. And that robot up there in the corner is from Lost in Space, one of my favorite stories. Let's move on to the next one. So this is a technology that's coming out of Los Alamos. That's a smart window. Instead of solar cells on the house, this is a window on the south side of a house that's collecting solar particles and creating a gas that then turns into electricity that is used inside homes and big buildings. It makes sense up in Los Alamos because they've got a lot of big buildings with a lot of windows. The value prop behind it is these quantum dots that allow any house to become its own solar site, any building to become its own solar site without an extra installation.
Hey, Susan, you have about 10 minutes left.
I have 10 minutes. Thank you. Appreciate it. Let's go on to our next slide. So we're going to talk about the value prop. From the beginning, I've already talked about how you're going to take this business model canvas and you're going to use it to plan and hopefully work with a mentor to ensure your success. And so I could see some of you that are listening to this presentation asking people, do you have a business model canvas? Can we go over it together? If they've gone through the innovation programs or the accelerator programs, they should be able to show you something similar to this. Let's go to the next slide. All righty. So on our business model canvas, again, we're going to say, this is the product we solve. We're going to describe our idea, but not in the technical details and drawings. We're just saying, what's its name? What does it do? What makes it unique? This is what we're presenting to people. We're going to describe our market. What's the name of our market? How is it our product unique in that market? And that is what we're working on when we're going through our customer interviews. We are going to have to work on a prototype. It's always nice to talk to investors when you've got a prototype that's working, okay? On the left there, hopefully we've got a provisional patent at least on the product so that we feel comfortable going out and talking. But the biggest circle on this whole thing over there to the left, in addition to that triangle, should be, what did we find out by talking to customers? When people find out you've been talking to customers, the problems we think we're solving, they validated, and what features that we're working on for our final prototype, they get excited for the purposes of investment and working with us. This is what we need to have people focused on. Next slide. Creating a use case. This is always very interesting. This is the process of creating a story. I liken it to cartoon cells. When you look at a cartoon, it starts with, this is the thing that happened, and this is what the hero did, and over here, this was the impact, you know, the wow, kabam, zowie, all the things that happen in the cartoon. We want to create a use case story that tells, this is the problem, this is what it can do, and this is the problems we solve, in 3 slides. We want people to participate in virtual pitch contests. They're all over the place right now. You don't exactly have to be in the geographical area to do it. And we want people to practice because it introduces us to people and it makes sure we can talk coherently about what it is we're doing. Then we want to create a concrete commercial and technology plan and timeline. This is needed for the pitch deck. It says this is where we are, upper quadrant of this landscape piece of paper. These are the technical steps we're taking. Bottom quadrant, these are the commercial steps we're creating. And we do coach people at the Rainforest on how to do this. Next slide. Here's the business model of Canvas. So let's go over it real quick. In the center, your value prop. To the right, your customer segments. Up there on the top, your customer relationships. What that really means is, how do we sell? Down there under channels, who's going to help us get our product out? Over to the left, our key actions and activities we need to take. Key resources we need in order to get this to market. It may be that we got our prototype 1 done, we need prototype 2 done, and this is what we need: a person who's a software engineer, we need somebody who is a laser engineer, we need somebody who can help us get this out to market. Key partners, I like to leave partners last. Really, we recommend against having partners who own part of the technology to begin with, other than the one main partner here. In the case of the university, is the University of New Mexico. And then revenue streams, where do we think the revenue streams are going to be? I'm not talking profit, just where's the money going to come from? And it could be a grant to begin with. And then over there, cost structure, and we build from the bottom up. We don't look at the market and say it's worth 54 billion, and we're going to come up with a device that costs 250 million, and therefore we're going to make $1 billion in 1 year. We take a look at what does it cost for everything, from the building we're building it in, to the device itself and its parts, to how we're going to package it, how we're going to get it into its final article so it can be used. Final article is the word we use in the business for something that is reproducible. And that applies to software, that applies to medications, that applies to medical devices and high technologies, deep technologies. You can go to strategizer.com to learn more about how this works. Let's go on to the next slide. So what is your value prop? This is a process of going through, again, the problem we're solving. For whom are we creating value? What's unique about our what we're doing? And that's probably the hardest thing to do. In the beginning, that's just a hypothesis. We pick up the phone, we call somebody, and we find out that this giant laser company in China, in Taiwan, is trying to build something similar to us. We don't tell them that it's the same as what we've got, but we find out from them what they see their market, what their relationships are, how they sell. Believe it or not, they tell us. And then we have to sit down and figure out what kinds of bundles of products and services are we going to have. And then beginning with our prototype, we're probably going to have to install it ourselves. But eventually we want to have an easy way of them installing this. And this is what gives us value to the market. But we'll find that out. We'll find out where those markets are, who's building these things, what they see as a value to their customer. Are they in telecommunications? Are they in medicine? What markets are they in? And how is it that we are going to be able to enter those markets? We keep creative value prop, a statement of the value to the customer, and always says, what's the need that we're solving? What's the problem that we're solving? How do we do it? And what are the benefits of what we're doing? So what is it? What's the need we're solving? What are the benefits, and what our product is doing? That's what the people out there that buy it, That's what the investors, that's what the manufacturers, that's what the channels, that's what the partners want to hear. Next slide. Problem and opportunity. We're going to go on to storyboard and what that looks like. So let's go to the next slide. This is kind of interesting. This is based on my fascination with cartoons and Disney, but and a few other companies that do that sort of thing. They always have these big storyboards, and when I realized what they were doing was they're first starting up with the problem that the hero has to solve, and what problem he thinks he's solving, or she thinks she's solving, versus what they actually find out is really going on. And this is how what we do as these innovators solves that problem. What is the value to the market? Who interacts with our product? That's the customer segments. And what did we think like success looks like from their point of view? I always had customers say to me in any of the companies that I worked with, and there's over 600 of them, what are you needing and what would success look like if you use my product? And that is one of our critical problems that we need to solve, and talking with them and interviewing them. Next slide. We take what we get from our potential customers, and we do a lot of interviews. We're working on, at least initially, before we talk with other people about, can we do a pitch deck presentation? It's about as many as 100 interviews and more. From that, we pivot. We find out whether our product features, services, users, channels, or manufacturers and partners make sense that we hypothesized by doing a lot of research. Next slide. We create a list of potential customers in their markets, and we go out and we talk to them. And like I said, we've got students at the University of New Mexico right now that are talking to companies like Facebook to find out whether or not they want to use their product and could they use it. And they're already hearing, is it working now? Can we use it? Next slide. We want to create relationships with our customers. We want to be able to talk with them because they become the evangelists. Remember, one of the things I said is polarize your market. It's fine if they love what you're doing. It's okay if they don't even like it. They got their own idea about what they want to do. But what we don't want to have is they don't know about it and they're ambivalent about it. They're not sure they want to use it. Next slide. Back to our business model canvas. This is the order and kind of what we fill things out. Let's go to the next slide. And customer relationships is how we make money. Next slide. Oh, when I want to, you know what? I'm going to stay. Go to the next slide. There's something called the Business Navigator, and you can go there and see various kinds of business models. This is a model that has to do with licensing. They'll talk with you about the companies that do licensing. What's really interesting is I don't think people realize that older companies, value companies like Levi and Coca-Cola actually are licensed companies. The manufacturing sites for Coca-Cola, they don't even know what's in the magic sauce. They get that sauce and they put the bubbly in it and they can the soda. Levi, they have licensed out to companies to produce their jeans. They don't sell them themselves. Let's go to the next slide. Subscription, this is interesting. We've got one company that's a great big database that we're working on right now that predicts the siting of solar and wind turbine fields. And what we've realized is that the data is for free. So paying a subscription service for how we put reports out to them to tell them where to build that are accurate, that's what we're going to do. That's our business model. Next slide. Market size. I want to get to this before we finish. We're in our last minute. We really, really, really have to get some handle on market size. The first piece is how big is the total universe? We don't want to put that in the pitch. The second one is how can I reach people with my sales channel? But the target market is the one we can access at the beginning as a startup. Not knowing exactly what we're getting into. And it's generally smaller. This is an example of an accessories market with wheelchairs. And next slide. There's a best way to determine your size of initial market. And then we're gonna stop right here. We take a look at the prototype and is it ready? Cost of people, cost of facilities, cost of just doing business, cost of materials, the sales channel, any debt that we're holding, And now we can create an average cost per product. Then we take a look last at how many sales we think we can make. And we're not going to do 1,000 sales a month unless we have a software app that's going to be different than that. And then during our customer interviews, we validate whether or not this is correct. We find out if they're willing to pay the price that we think we're going to pay for, we're going to ask for our product. A lot of times they are. And then we figure out who we have to hire. And now we've got our first target accessible market. And we do want to put that into our pitches before we actually nail down investors. Next slide. This is a process that we talk about calling getting, keeping, and growing customers. You're going to see a lot in here about using social media, a lot about using Zoom for hackathons, people talking to one another, and going by zip codes through areas where there's support systems for some of the products that we're launching, and whether or not they're going to help us get out to market. Peer-reviewed journal articles are fine, but for the most part, what we want to do is get out and talk to people, period. I don't care whether they're conferences, blogging, using influencers, talking online. It's a little different for software and apps than it is for actual devices, and it's certainly different than pharmaceuticals, where we're just raising money and interest and trying to keep ourselves afloat while we develop it. Bottom line, we want to retain these customers, and the people we're talking to during customer interviews, we're retaining them by talking to them on a regular basis. Let's go to the last slides, the last 3 slides, Cecilia, and I'll turn people to what else is in here. We'll put these presentations up so that you can look at them. This one right here. It's got the questions we need to answer before we talk to investors, and we want to have hypotheses about all of these before we do our interviews. And I've already gone over all of that. You can go to that website to learn more about it. Next slide. Next slide. Mentoring, you can read that later. That just has to do with the support you need. And that's the kind of, Matthew, I think a lot of what you're going to be doing to work with people as they start trying to get their technologies out there. Next slide. These are some of the resources at the University of New Mexico. Just go to Lobo Rainforest for the videos, or go to innovations.unm.edu to find out about all our upcoming events, or talk with Cecilia Pacheco, and her email's on there to find out more about what we're doing. I think the last slide's next. List of selected references. In this presentation, I used a lot of work from Eric Rees, who is the father of the Lean Startup, first graduate student of Steve Blank, who's also on there. He's Haas School of Business, University of California, Berkeley, and they are the chief technology evangelists of how to do a lean startup, which was what we've been talking about. I know that this didn't look at, what licenses do I need? How do I sign up with the state of New Mexico? There are mentoring sessions with Stacy Sacco that you can send people to. He will help them with all of that. He has a great pamphlet he's created about all the things you need to do. But putting effort into that before we find out if we've actually got something people want. We want to see people in their first 9 months focusing on getting a prototype, working at grant funding or some kind of funding that will help us to get this forward. Sometimes it's your own credit card, but we want to find out and confirm that there's actually a market. And that is the first step in making a successful startup. If you've got any questions, I'm Susan Cornelius. I can be reached on email. Cecilia will give you that to you if you need it. It's srcornelius@acceleratetosolutions.com. I look forward to hearing more from all of you about what you're doing, and I wish you the best of success.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you everyone for joining. We did have a couple other people here who dropped off, but for those of you who are still on,